Hello, everyone. Tonight's story begins with a blizzard, a remote cabin, and a woman he's been trying not to desire for years. Because sometimes being stranded together is exactly what it takes for the truth to stop hiding behind a careful silence. And if you enjoyed these stories, you can find my Patreon page, where I share warmer and uncensored videos, in the description section. By the time Leonie killed the engine, the world outside had turned into a white, roaring wall, and the only thing I could hear louder than the wind was my own pulse. Snow slapped sideways across the windshield in frantic, furious sheets. Pine branches bowed and thrashed like something alive. The narrow track we'd taken up from the county road had vanished under drifts so fast it looked as if the mountain were erasing our path behind us on purpose. "We're not making it back down tonight," Leonie said. "There are sentences that change the temperature of your blood." That was one of them. She kept both hands on the steering wheel for a second after she spoke, gaze fixed on the dark outline of the cabin ahead of us. The place stood half hidden behind veils of snow and black trees, its pitched roof loaded white, the porch light dead, and the windows blank as shut eyes. My grandparents had built it 40 years ago, and every board in it knew how to groan dramatically in weather like this. I hadn't been up here since late autumn. Blythe had promised this would be simple. Drive up, check the pipes, grab the file box she'd left in the loft, drive back before the storm got bad. But Blythe had stayed home with a fever and called the one person I could never behave normally around to take her place. Now I was stranded in a remote mountain cabin with my sister's best friend, and my body had the humiliating, immediate reaction of acting like that was somehow the bigger emergency. Leonie unbuckled. Imogen. The way she said my name should have been illegal in at least 3 states. Calm, low, a warning and a kindness at once. I realized I was staring at her and looked away too fast. "I heard you." "Good. Then listen carefully." She reached into the back seat for the flashlight and the emergency pack. Even in the half-dark of the truck, she moved with that maddening confidence she seemed to wear the way other women wore perfume. Black wool coat belted tight, dark hair twisted at the nape of her neck, and already coming loose from the wet, strong hands, a profile cut clean enough to make me resent geometry. "We take the bags, get inside, get a fire going. We don't waste time panicking in the car." "I'm not panicking." She lifted one eyebrow. "I'm panic adjacent," I admitted. That almost smile touched her mouth and vanished. Leonie's almost smiles had ruined more of my life than any fully committed expression ever could. 7 years. That was the distance between us, and somehow it had always felt like more. When I was 16 and all elbows and secret bruises from walking into furniture because I lived half in my head, Leonie had already been 23 and impossible. Blythe's brilliant best friend from university. All long coats and dry humor and frightening self-possession. She came into rooms as if she didn't need anything from them. She had once found me sitting on the back stairs with my knees pulled to my chest while my parents ripped each other open in the kitchen, and instead of telling me it would be fine, which would have been a lie, she'd sat beside me in silence until the shouting stopped and handed me her scarf because I was cold. I had been doomed ever since. Maybe sooner. The truck rocked under a brutal gust. Leonie shoved her door open against it. Snow flung itself in instantly, needling my face and neck. I swore and dragged my duffel toward me. The cold outside was not a temperature so much as an occupation. It took over everything in seconds. Eyes, lungs, fingers, the space between skin and fabric. The cabin was only 30 feet away, but by the time we reached the porch, my jeans were wet to the knee and my hair was pasted to my cheeks. Leonie shouldered the door after 2 attempts with the key, then got it open with a hard push that sent a stale burst of cedar, dust, and old wood into the storm. We stumbled inside. She slammed the door behind us, and the silence that followed was so abrupt it felt staged, not true silence. The house was breathing around us, old beams ticking, wind worrying the eaves, snow whispering against the windows. But compared to outside, it felt like standing inside a held breath. I leaned back against the door, wet and shivering, and suddenly too aware of the fact that there were only two of us in the whole mountain. Or so it felt. Leonie clicked on the flashlight and swept it over the room. The beam found the stone fireplace, the braided rug, the mismatched chairs my grandfather had refinished badly, the staircase to the loft. The power was out. Of course it was. Generator might still work, she said, but the fuel line was temperamental last winter. Fire first. I watched her cross the room as if she belonged in every emergency the world could invent. Coat off, sweater damp at the shoulders, lantern from the sideboard, kindling box by the hearth. She knelt on the rug and began building a fire with quick, efficient hands. And because I had apparently learned nothing in 24 years, my first thought was not help her. It was, disastrously, there are women who should never be allowed to do practical tasks in fitted charcoal cashmere. Imogen. I'm getting wood, I said too quickly. Good, and your lip is bleeding. I blinked. What? You bit it. Heat went straight up my throat. That is an incredibly invasive thing to notice. She struck the match. Flame flared gold over her face, catching the clean line of her nose, the pale scar at her chin I'd once asked about when I was 19 and tipsy and too brave. She hadn't told me then. She didn't tell me now either. Instead, she lit the kindling and said, "Take the stack from the covered rack on the porch, not the exposed pile, and don't be heroic." Impossible. Heroism is my entire brand. This time I got half a real smile. Your brand is expensive boots and bad timing. I hate how specific that is. The fire took with a soft, hungry crackle. I turned before she could see how much that small exchange had steadied me. The porch was worse than before. Wind knifed through the gap in my coat, and snow had already piled against the railing. I grabbed an armful of dry logs from the rack, shifted, almost slipped, recovered with the kind of graceless little hop that would haunt me later, and came back in with freezing fingers and what dignity I could salvage. Leonie looked up from the hearth. You're limping. I am not. You absolutely are. I stepped awkwardly. It's not an injury. It's a moral failing. She stood and took half the logs from my arms without asking. Her fingers brushed the inside of my wrist, bare between glove and sleeve. Just that. A glancing contact. Still, every nerve I owned lit up like kindling. I hated this. I loved this. I was going to die in this cabin, and the official cause would be proximity. We need dry clothes, she said. There are blankets in the cedar chest, and I remember spare things in the hall closet. Probably old flannel and regrettable sweaters. Some of us can carry regrettable sweaters. Some of us, she said, could be used as an argument against optimism if they stay in wet denim. The hall closet coughed up exactly what she'd predicted. Old wool socks, 2 thick blankets, a stack of towels that smelled faintly of lavender sachets and old summers, and a collection of forgotten clothes. My grandfather's enormous plaid shirt, a pair of drawstring sweatpants with a frayed hem, a cream fisherman sweater that might once have belonged to my grandmother and was soft with age. There was one bathroom, narrow and cold and lined with knotty pine. I took my bundle in there, peeled off my wet clothes with chattering teeth, and stood for a second in my bra and underwear, staring at myself in the mirror like maybe another version of me would materialize. One who could share a stranded night with Leonie Vale and not feel like her ribcage had been replaced with a trapped bird. The steam from my breath fogged the glass. My hair hung damp over one shoulder. My cheeks were pink with cold and mortification. This is Blythe's best friend, I told my reflection sternly, as if I had not been repeating some variation of that for years. This is a woman who has helped your family move furniture, who brought casseroles when your mother died, who once told your first girlfriend to leave your apartment because you were too heartbroken to do it yourself. This is not a fantasy. This is a storm. Unfortunately, storms were very good at turning houses into confessionals. When I came back into the main room, Leonie had shed her coat and changed out of her own wet sweater into a dark thermal long sleeve that fit her in ways I felt should have required a permit. She had also somehow coaxed the room into partial life. Fire steadily building, lantern lit on the mantel, 2 candles found and burning on the coffee table. The air already smelled warmer, like resin and smoke and melting snow. Then she looked up and saw me in the cream sweater and my grandfather's ridiculous sweatpants. And something in her face changed. Not much. Leonie was never much. A slight stillness. A pause so brief I could have imagined it, but I hadn't imagined the way her gaze dropped, then lifted, then stayed on mine a fraction too long. "That suits you," she said. I folded my arms, because apparently I wanted to make sure the sweater also strangled me. "If you say I look cozy, I'm throwing a candle at your head." "You look dangerous," she said, and bent to adjust the fire before I could decide whether I'd heard her correctly. My mouth went dry. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over the ridge, muted by snow, but unmistakable. The storm had teeth in it after all. Leonie rose and crossed to the window. "We need to assume the road's gone until morning at least. Maybe longer. Signal?" I checked my phone. One wavering bar appeared, vanished, and took my hope with it. "Nothing useful." "Mine too." She set her phone face down on the side table. "There's bottled water in the pantry if the pipes froze. We'll inventory food, check the first aid kit, and see if the backup battery for the radio still works." I stared at her. "Do you make lists when the apocalypse comes, or is this level of competence specifically for weather events?" "Imogen." "Sorry, you're right." I shoved damp hair behind my ears. "Tell me what to do." For a second, her expression softened in a way that hit me lower than any smile. "Stay warm first, then help me." Something in my chest turned over. There should be laws against women who said things like that in candlelight, while storms sealed the world shut. The pantry was better stocked than I expected. Canned tomatoes, pasta, rice, dried beans, to tea, crackers, a jar of honey, gone grainy with cold, powdered soup packets Blythe had probably stocked during one of her responsible phases, and 3 bottles of whiskey my grandfather would have sworn were medicinal. Leonie found a hand-crank radio in the mudroom and a first aid tin under the sink. I found a box of matches, 2 more lanterns, a bundle of candles, and exactly 1 bag of marshmallows fused into a single sweet brick. "We're rich," I announced, holding it up. Leonie glanced over from where she was testing the radio battery. "On what market?" "The market of morale." "That's not a market. That's a hostage negotiation." "Close enough." The radio hissed, sputtered, and finally dragged in a local weather report through a wash of static. Heavy accumulation, fallen trees, power outages across the county. Travel advisory upgraded to do not attempt. The anchorman's voice dissolved in crackle and came back long enough to tell us what we already knew. No one was coming up this road tonight. Leonie set the radio down. "We're staying put." The words settled into the room with the weight of wet wool. Staying put. As though stillness were simple. As though I had ever been still around her a day in my life. I busied myself at the counter because movement felt safer than looking at her. The cabin kitchen was narrow. All pine cabinets and old enamel knobs, with a black iron stove that could still be lit if the gas line cooperated. My grandmother had once made blueberry pancakes in here, while I sat on the counter and stole fruit from the bowl. Yeah, now the window over the sink was dark with snow, and my fingers shook while I tried to pry open a packet of soup. Leonie came to stand beside me. "You're using scissors on dehydrated vegetables." "Huh, I'm improvising." "You're committing a small tragedy." She took the packet from me with maddening ease. "Move." I moved. Obviously. She slid it cleanly with a pocket knife she produced from nowhere because, of course, she had a pocket knife. Of course, Leonie moved through life as if it had been designed by people who occasionally forgot to stock practical objects, and she intended to correct for them. "You carry that around all the time?" I asked. "Since I was 19. "That is either the least or most attractive thing about you." Her hand stilled on the packet. The kitchen was suddenly very small. I heard myself breathe. Heard the storm rattle the panes. Heard water begin to heat in the kettle. Then Leonie said, without looking at me, "I'm not touching that sentence." Coward. Disciplined. The answer landed somewhere delicate and volatile inside me. I laughed because not laughing would have been a worse betrayal. You always talk like you're editing a better conversation than the one I'm having. That's because you improvise with dangerous materials. Soup? Flirtation, she said, and finally looked at me. My face went hot so fast it was almost comic. I wasn't. You were. I crossed my arms. Maybe I'm just naturally provocative when dehydrated. That must be exhausting for you. It's agony. A corner of her mouth lifted again, and there it was. That tiny private expression that always felt stolen. Like I'd caught sight of something I wasn't supposed to have. Leonie smiled for everyone else in social settings. Polite, composed, quick. But the small smiles, the dangerous ones, belonged to quiet rooms and low light, and apparently, winter storms. We made soup and tea. The gas on the stove sputtered once, then held. We ate in front of the fire because the rest of the cabin felt too cold, bowls balanced on our knees, candles throwing soft, unstable shadows against the walls. I sat cross-legged on the rug. Leonie took the end of the couch, one arm stretched along the back as if she'd been sitting exactly there all my life, and I'd only just noticed. That wasn't true. I'd always noticed. I noticed when she rolled her sleeves, when she loosened her hair and retied it, when she frowned at the weather report, when she lifted the tea to her mouth and looked over the rim of the mug as if she knew I was noticing and was going to leave me to suffer for it. "You're staring again," she said. I nearly inhaled broth. You can't accuse someone of that while doing it back. I wasn't staring. I was assessing. "Oh, that's much better. Please continue your professional evaluation." "How is your ankle?" I looked down. In the chaos of unloading wood and supplies, I'd forgotten about the awkward twist on the porch. The left ankle was beginning to ache in earnest now, a deep, hot pulse under the wool sock. "It's fine." "You're bad at lying when you're in pain." "I'm bad at lying when I'm talking to you in general." Silence. I had not meant to say that. Or maybe I had and only realized it after it was loose in the room, alive between us. Leonie set her mug down with deliberate care. "Show me." "It's barely anything." Imogen. The use of my full name in that tone should have come with structural reinforcement. I put the bowl aside and extended my leg. She shifted off the couch to the rug in one smooth motion and sat close enough that I could feel the heat from her body through the blanket pooled over my knees. Her hands were cool from the tea mug when she lifted my foot gently into her lap. The room narrowed to that. Her thumb pressed, careful, along the outside of my ankle. Pain flashed and I hissed. "Swelling," she murmured. "Not terrible. Did you hit your hands too?" I looked down at my knuckles. The right hand had a shallow scrape across 2 fingers, angry and red where I'd caught myself on the porch railing. I hadn't even registered it. Leonie had. Of course she had. "I can manage a dramatic death if that helps," I said, my voice thinner than I wanted. "No." Her attention stayed on my ankle. "No dramatics. Hold still." She fetched the first aid tin, and I sat there watching her tear open an instant cold pack and wrap it in a dish towel before pressing it lightly to the swelling. Then she took my hand, turned it palm down, cleaned the scrape with antiseptic that stung like hell. I jerked. "Ow!" She looked up. "Sorry." The word was soft enough to bruise me. I shook my head. "No, I just forgot how much antiseptic hates me." Leonie's fingers stayed around mine a beat longer than necessary. Candlelight moved over the planes of her face, turning her severe beauty warmer, stranger. I had spent years making a religion out of details I could not touch. The tiny scar at her chin, the fine silver ring on her right thumb, the faint line between her brows when she concentrated. The way restraint in her looked less like distance than pressure. "Why did Blythe send you?" I asked before I could decide whether the question was wise. "She asked," Leonie said. "That's not an answer." "It's the first answer." I watched her tape a small square of gauze over my knuckles with impossible neatness. "And the second?" "The second is that I didn't like the idea of you driving up here alone with a storm coming in." It should not have felt like a confession. It did anyway. "I'm 24. "I'm aware." "You say that like I'm a reckless intern." She finally let go of my hand and sat back on her heels. I say it like mountain roads don't care how old you are." "That's annoyingly reasonable." "I do try." I stretched my injured ankle toward the fire and stared into the flames because looking at her would have made me say something I couldn't retrieve. The logs cracked and settled. Smoke curled warm and faint up the chimney. Somewhere overhead, something on the roof thudded under the weight of accumulating snow. When Leonie spoke again, her voice had changed. Less practical. Closer. "You used to hate storms." I turned my head. "I still do." "No." She shook her head slightly. "You hate being powerless in them. That's different." I blinked. Most people remembered that I got anxious in bad weather. Leonie remembered the precise shape of the fear. "When I was 12, I said slowly, "lightning hit the sycamore outside my bedroom and split it in half. My mother laughed because I screamed before the thunder landed." Leonie's jaw tightened. She had met my mother enough times to know that laugh could be a weapon. "You were there once," I said. "A summer storm. Power cut out. Blythe was at rehearsal and I was trying to act normal and you handed me a flashlight before I asked." I remember. Of course she did. That was the problem with Leonie. Nothing she gave ever felt accidental. Attention from her came precise and devastatingly placed. And once you'd had it, every lesser version from everyone else felt like static. The radio crackled, then died entirely. Leonie exhaled through her nose. "Battery's gone. So it's just us and the apocalypse now." "Apparently." I should have let the quiet sit. Instead, I said, too lightly, "Blythe is going to be unbearable when she finds out we got trapped together." Leonie's expression shuddered with such speed it made my stomach dip. "Why?" she asked. I toyed with the edge of the blanket. "Because she still thinks you can fix anything. Because she trusts you more than she trusts a lot of blood relatives. Because she has a weirdly smug theory that you and this cabin can survive nuclear events." "That's not what you meant." "No, it wasn't. I should have lied. I did not." "She used to tease me," I said, keeping my eyes on the fire. "When I was younger." Leonie was very still. "About what?" I laughed once without humor. "She thought it was funny that I followed you around like a badly socialized cat." "Imogen." She stopped when I told her to stop. I shrugged, trying to make old humiliation look smaller than it was. "I was 17. Everything felt like being skinned." "She should never have teased you for that." Something in her voice made me look up. Leonie was not often visibly angry. It was one of the things that made it so startling when it surfaced. Not loud, not messy, just a sharpened stillness that seemed to pull the temperature down around her. "It wasn't a crime," I said softly. "No," she said. "It wasn't." The room held that for a moment. Then, perhaps because I was tired and the storm had turned the whole mountain into a pressure chamber, I asked the question I'd been swallowing for years in smaller, less dignified forms. "Did you know?" Her eyes found mine. "When I was younger," I said. "Did you know I had a crush on you?" There it was. Ugly and earnest, and impossible to drag back. Wind hit the side of the cabin hard enough to rattle the plates in the kitchen. The fire snapped. A draft moved one of the candle flames sideways. Leonie looked at me for a long second that felt like standing under something falling. "Yes," she said at last. I stopped breathing properly. Of all the answers, honesty had been the only one I wasn't prepared for. I made a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't cut in the middle. That is actually worse. Probably. You could have lied. I don't think you'd have believed me. I swallowed. No. No. She said it almost gently, and that somehow hurt more. I tucked my hands under the blanket so she wouldn't see them shake. Was I obvious? Only to someone already paying attention. The room went very quiet. I should have left it there. But the thing about old wounds is that once the skin breaks, you become stupidly committed to finding out how deep they go. So why? I asked, my voice thin and steady in equal parts. Did you start avoiding me after I turned 19? Leonie's mouth tightened. I did not avoid you. I looked at her. She sighed once. Fine, I reduced opportunities for confusion. Opportunities for confusion, I repeated. That is such an elegant way to say you stopped answering my texts. You were 19. I know how old I was. I was there. And I was 26, and your sister's best friend, and in your house more than my own some months. Your mother had just died. You were raw and grieving, and half the time I couldn't tell if you wanted me or just wanted not to be alone. The truth in it landed hard enough to make my eyes burn. I wanted both, I said before I could stop myself. Leonie closed her eyes briefly. That was somehow worse than if she'd looked away. The fire popped. Snow pressed at the dark windows. Everything in the cabin seemed to lean toward us, listening. Leonie stood first. It was not retreat exactly, more like she needed the room to breathe. She crossed to the mantel, braced one hand there, then turned back with the kind of composure that only made sense if she had spent years building it against things like me. We need more wood inside before the porch drifts over, she said. I stared. That's your response? It's the response that keeps us warm. It's also a spectacular way to not answer the part where you vanished from my life with grammar. A muscle moved in her jaw. I didn't vanish. No? My laugh came out brittle. That's interesting, because for about a year I was pretty sure I'd hallucinated an entire category of eye contact. The words hung there, bright and reckless. Leonie's gaze sharpened. You're tired. Oh, that's condescending. It's observant. Same dress, different hemline. For one dangerous second, I thought she might snap back. Instead, she drew a slow breath. Imogen, I'm not having this conversation if what you want from me is to say I was careless with you. I wasn't. The certainty in that made me angry for reasons that had very little to do with logic and everything to do with old hurt. You don't get to define it that cleanly, I said. You knew, and then you decided what was best for me without letting me have any say in it. Her face changed again. Not colder, exactly. More naked in the restraint. You think I don't know that? I opened my mouth. Closed it. The wind shoved hard at the cabin, as if to remind us both the world outside was still trying to get in. Leonie rubbed a hand over the back of her neck. Your ankle needs rest. We can either keep lacerating each other, or we can get through the night. Very flattering set of options. It's the best I have right now. Something in me wanted to keep pushing. Another part, older and quieter, knew the set of her shoulders meant she was closer to frayed than she ever let herself appear. I hated that I could read that in her. I hated more that I wanted to soothe it. Fine, I muttered. Would. We brought in another stack together, moving around each other with the rigid politeness of people pretending their pulse rates were normal. The porch light remained dead. Snow had climbed halfway up the steps. Leonie checked the generator shed with the flashlight, while I held the door against the wind and tried not to limp. The machine sat squat and stubborn in the corner like a retired boxer. She got it to cough once, then refuse her on principle. You look offended, I said. I am offended. At the generator? At the presumption. That pulled a laugh out of me before I could help it. Leonie shot me a glance over her shoulder. Go on, for one flickering second, the old familiar ease of her, dry, slightly ruthless, impossible not to love, cut through everything sharp between us. Then my foot slipped in the slush near the shed. It happened stupidly fast. 1 second I had the door frame. The next my bad ankle rolled and I pitched sideways off the concrete lip. Leonie caught me before I hit. Not gracefully. Nothing about it was graceful. Her arm hit hard around my waist, the flashlight swung wild, my palms struck her coat, and we ended up half stumbling together into the side of the shed with enough force to knock an oath out of both of us. For one suspended beat, she held me there, my back against the cold wood. Her body braced in front of mine, shielding me from the wind. One hand spread wide at my waist, the other splayed on the wall beside my shoulder. Snow caught in her dark hair. Her breath came visible between us, quick and white. "Tell me," she said, voice low and sharpened by fear, "why you insist on proving my blood pressure can still do athletic things." My own breathing had gone embarrassingly high in my chest. "I thought you liked competence." Falling sideways into a generator shed is not competence. It had style. You nearly went down on a concrete edge. The hand at my waist tightened once, involuntary, protective, furious, alive. I was so aware of her that it bordered on pain. "Leonie," I said, because her name was the only sound that fit in my mouth. She looked at me then. Really looked. Snow on my lashes, her hair coming loose, the storm screaming around us as if the whole mountain objected to restraint. Her gaze dropped to my mouth. My entire body went still. The moment sharpened to a point so fine it could have drawn blood. Then she stepped back. The loss of her heat felt obscene. "Inside," she said. I swallowed the kind of disappointment that makes you feel 19 no matter how many years have passed since. "Right, of course." We trudged back through the snow in silence. Inside, the cabin was warmer, darker, more intimate for having been left. The fire had settled into a low orange bed. I fed it, while Leonie hung our wet outer layers by the hearth and set the kettle back on. We did not mention the shed. We did not mention the way she had looked at my mouth like it had interrupted a thought she'd been having for years. I hated adulthood for requiring this level of pretending. The bedroom situation revealed itself after a brief survey of the cabin. There was one proper bedroom on the ground floor with a narrow double bed and a quilt older than I was. The loft upstairs technically had 2 camp cots, but the single wall heater that served that side of the cabin was dead, and the draft coming under the eaves could have preserved fish. The couch in the main room unfolded, though not without sounding like a threat. "You take the bedroom," Leonie said immediately. "No." "Imogen." "No," I repeated. "First, my ankle is not an amputation. Second, you drove through a storm because my sister weaponized your competence. Third, if I take the bedroom while you martyr yourself on a folding couch, I'll hear my grandmother's ghost calling me tacky." Leonie looked at the couch. It looked back without promise. "We can swap halfway through the night," she offered. That is an insane solution." "It's efficient." "It's ridiculous." "It is not." "Leonie, that couch was old during the Carter administration. That does not make it unusable." "It does if I have to listen to your spine filing a complaint till dawn." The faintest softness touched her eyes. "You're very bossy when injured." "I'm always bossy. People just get distracted." "By what?" I almost said, and bit it back before I strangled on my own nerve. Leonie considered the bedroom again, then the fire. "The main room will stay warmer. So we both sleep here." Her gaze moved to me. My pulse immediately made terrible life choices. "There's the couch and the rug," I said much too quickly. "Not together. Unless there's some bizarre moral lesson you want to deliver through furniture. I just mean we both stay where the heat is. Practical, completely normal, mature." "You're spiraling." "I'm aware." That almost smile again. Small, private, brutal. The couch and rug, then, she said. You get the couch. I wanted to argue, but my ankle had started throbbing in earnest, and the idea of being able to stretch out near the fire was embarrassingly appealing. Only if you take the extra blanket. I was planning to. Good, because I've seen you act self-sacrificing, and it's deeply irritating. I'll add that to my character file. There are tabs. Several. We settled into the practical business of making the room survivable. Leonie found another quilt in the linen cupboard. I made tea again, mostly so I'd have a task. She checked the door latches, wedged rolled towels against the draft at the back door, and set a flashlight and matches on the table within easy reach. The domesticity of it was so intimate it made me ache. Not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't. Because Leonie moved around the room, making a temporary life with me as if it were natural. At one point, she climbed onto a chair to reset a loose window latch, and I stood below her instinctively, hands half raised in case the chair slipped. She glanced down. Planning to catch me? You're not the only one with rescue instincts. What does that mean? It means I know exactly how strong you are. The answer hit me harder than a compliment had any right to. How? I asked before I could stop myself. She stepped off the chair. The cuffs of her thermal had ridden up, exposing the elegant bones of her wrists. Bah, I've been paying attention too. There are lines people say without realizing they are handing over a live wire. Leonie knew exactly what she was doing. That might have been the worst part, or the best. By 10, the storm had deepened from violent to biblical. Snow hissed at the windows without pause. The roof boomed once with a sound that sent both of us looking up, and Leonie had to reassure me it was likely a branch dropping from one of the pines uphill. We played gin rummy by lantern light because there was a deck in the side table, and because the alternative was staring openly at each other until one of us combusted. You still shuffle like a card shark, I said. You still announce every good hand with your face. That is slander. It's anthropology. I'm going to tell Blythe you cheated. Leonie laid down 3 queens with surgical calm. Blythe already knows I cheat at cards. Traitor. You say that as if you haven't been using your left hand to bend the corner of the 7 of hearts since the second round. I looked at my hand. She was right. I hate your powers. No, you don't. It was a simple sentence. Quiet. Certain. My eyes lifted to hers. No, I thought, with a force that was almost grief. I really, really don't. She won the last hand by a point and refused to gloat, which was somehow more offensive. I retaliated by insisting she try the fused marshmallow brick over the fire. She took 1 charred bite, declared it criminal. Yes, and then stole the rest of the least burned edge while I was pouring more tea. The normality of that nearly undid me. Leonie had always seemed most beautiful to me when she forgot to be composed. A smudge of ash on her thumb, a strand of hair loose against her cheek, laughter under her breath at something she'd pretend not to find funny 10 minutes later. Around midnight, the cabin gave a long, low shudder under a gust so hard the candles fluttered almost out. The lantern dimmed. For 1 suspended second, the room lurched into near black. I froze. It was stupid, maybe, or childish. But darkness arriving abruptly still reached under my skin in an old instinctive way. My mother used to weaponize it during arguments, flicking hallway switches off as if withdrawing light from a room was the same as winning it. Even now, unexpected dark could make my body remember before my mind did. The lantern steadied. The room returned. But Leonie had seen me go rigid. Imogen, she set her mug down. Look at me. I did. Her voice lowered. It's just the lantern wick. Nothing else changed. That made my laugh break in the middle. You say that like my nervous system is a reasonable person. It doesn't have to be reasonable. It just has to stay with me. Everything in me softened and sharpened at once. I hate when you sound like that, I whispered. Like what? Like you know exactly where to put your voice, so I'll survive it. Leonie went very still. Then carefully, she stood and came to crouch in front of the couch. Do you want another blanket? No, I wanted honesty. I wanted the shed moment dragged into the light and made to answer for itself. I wanted to ask who had taught her to stop so cleanly. I wanted to lay my head against her shoulder and see whether the world ended or simply rearranged around the fact of it. Instead, I said, "Sit with me for a minute." The question landed between us, fragile as blown glass. Leonie hesitated only a fraction before sitting beside me on the couch. Not touching. Close enough that I could smell her soap beneath the wood smoke, the faint spice of the whiskey she'd finally accepted half a glass of, the cold trapped in her hair from outside. The storm pressed at the windows. The fire shifted lower. My pulse was ridiculous. When my mother died, I said, because apparently this was what my body had been leading me toward all evening. Everyone kept asking what I needed, and I wanted to claw my skin off. Leonie said nothing. That wasn't your question, I added. No, but it may be the answer to something. I stared at my hands. I was so angry at you that summer. I know. You stopped coming by as much. Yes. You were polite when I texted. Careful. It felt like being put behind glass. Leonie inhaled slowly. I was trying not to make your grief into something that belonged to me. The sentence landed with a kind of terrible grace. I turned to her. Did it? What? Belong to you. Her gaze held mine. Firelight moved over the dark gold flecks in her eyes. Details I knew because of course I knew them, because wanting someone for years turns observation into a form of hunger. Too much of you belonged to me already, she said quietly. The room disappeared. Not literally. I was still on a couch in a cabin with a storm trying to grind the world down around us, but some internal architecture gave way, something I had kept propped up for self-defense. Leonie, I breathed. She looked wrecked by saying it. That was the unbearable thing. Not smooth, not calculated, wrecked. And then, as if she felt the edge at the same moment I did, she stood abruptly and went to bank the fire. I should have gone to sleep then. Should have let the night close over what had already been said, and trusted that morning, if it came with roads and signal and ordinary daylight, would make us both more sensible. Instead, I watched Leonie move around the room in silence, adding a log to the fire, blowing out the extra candles to conserve them, checking the latch one more time on the front door. She had given me information I had wanted for years, and then acted like the floor might not hold if she stayed too near it. I understood the instinct. I just hated living inside the consequences of it. When she finally turned down the lantern, the cabin folded into dim amber and shadow. Firelight moved over the ceiling beams. The storm sound deepened with darkness, less weather than pressure, as if the mountain had come to lean its full weight against the walls. Leonie spread one quilt and a blanket on the rug by the hearth. I unfolded the couch with only moderate swearing at its hinges. You should take a painkiller, she said from the floor. I'll survive. That wasn't the question. I fished 2 ibuprofen from the first aid tin and swallowed them with lukewarm tea. Satisfied? No, she said, pulling the blanket over herself. But less annoyed? The intimacy of being annoyed on my behalf made me smile into the dark before I could stop it. We said goodnight, like 2 people who had not spent the last 6 hours pressing at every fault line available. It lasted maybe 10 minutes. The couch was wider than it looked, but no less lumpy. My ankle complained. The wind found a seam somewhere high in the chimney and made the room moan softly at intervals that would have been atmospheric in a different life, and were currently just rude. I rolled onto my side, facing the fire, and could see the outline of Leonie on the rug beyond it. One arm flung over her eyes, hair a dark spill on the pillow. Are you asleep? I whispered. No. I should have laughed. I didn't. There's a question, I said. Leonie lowered her arm. In the firelight, I could only make out pieces of her. The line of one cheekbone, the pale shape of her hand, the reflective catch in her eyes when she turned her head. There are several. This one's older. That sounds ominous. It's humiliating, actually. A brief pause. Go on. I held the blanket under my chin like that would somehow dignify what I was about to do. The summer before I left for university, Blythe had that ridiculous bonfire party by the lake. I remember. Of course she remembered. Leonie remembered everything that mattered. My problem was never uncertainty there. It was what, exactly, I had mattered as. I went down to the dock because I was overwhelmed, I said. You came after me. The memory rose so clearly it almost replaced the room. August heat, music thudding from the lawn, cheap beer and citronella candles, the dock boards warm under my bare feet. Leonie in a dark green dress, barefoot, carrying 2 bottles of water. I had been 18 and sharp-edged with anticipation, half in love with a future I had not lived yet and half broken already over leaving home. You sat beside me, I said, and you took the splinter out of my palm because I dragged my hand over the wood like an idiot. You were crying. I was not. You absolutely were. I was glistening. Leonie's laugh was quiet and low in the dark. I felt it rather than heard it. And then, I said, softer now, because the memory required it, you put your hand on the back of my neck, and I thought. The room seemed to still around me. Leonie didn't rescue me from finishing. I thought you were going to kiss me, I said. There. Years compressed into a single, ugly, clean line. The storm went on. The fire shifted. Somewhere in the walls, an old pipe clicked. Leonie's voice came after a moment, rougher than before. You didn't imagine that. I closed my eyes. It was the kind of answer that should have made me feel triumphant. Instead, it hurt so much I had to clamp my teeth together against the absurd urge to cry. Why didn't you? I asked. The mattress springs sighed under me when I rolled onto my back. There was no dignified way to ask it, no version that protected me from the answer. Because you were 18, Leonie said. Because your sister was drunk and singing Fleetwood Mac on a picnic table 20 feet away. Because one wrong choice would have followed you into every room of your life after that. Because I wanted to. I stared at the beams overhead until they blurred. That last part entered me slowly, like a splinter finding a deeper place. Because I wanted to. Do you know, I said after a while, how horrible it is that you keep saying exactly the right thing 10 years too late? 6, she corrected softly. Terrible. Pedantic, too. I'm consistent. That is not helping. No. A pause. It usually doesn't. I pushed the blanket down and sat up. The room tilted once with fatigue and old feeling. Leonie had shifted onto one elbow on the rug, watching me through the firelight. I need you to answer something without editing for elegance, I said. Her eyes held mine. That's a dangerous request. I know. What is it? I could hear my own heartbeat. Did you ever stop wanting me? Leonie went utterly still. The fire between us popped, one ember falling inward with a small red collapse. She rose slowly from the rug. For one impossible second, I thought she might leave the room. Instead, she came to the couch and crouched in front of me, close enough that I could see the exact shape of her mouth in the shifting light, the strain at the corners as if restraint were a physical thing she could bite down on. No, she said. There are yeses hidden inside certain no's, whole wrecked countries inside them. My hands were clenched in the blanket. Leonie's gaze dropped to them, then lifted again as if she did not trust herself to look lower. Imogen, she said, and it was warning and plea and something far more dangerous. You are not asking small questions. I have had 6 years to make them worse. You should not be asking them tonight. Why? Because we're trapped? Because you're tired? Because you're hurt? Because storms make people mistake intensity for clarity? Is that what you're doing? Her jaw flexed. No. Neither am I. The air between us felt charged enough to spark. Leonie lifted a hand toward my face and stopped halfway, as if even that much touch required negotiation with something fierce inside her. I don't know what expression I made. Whatever it was, it undid her a little. I saw it happen. Her knuckles brushed my cheek. I forgot every language except her name. She inhaled once, sharply, and slid her fingers back into my damp hair, tucking it behind my ear with a tenderness so careful it was nearly unbearable. Her thumb traced the shell of it, then the line of my jaw. Heat ran through me so swiftly I felt it in my stomach, my knees, the ache in my throat. "Leonie," I whispered again. She leaned in. Our foreheads touched first. The world didn't end. It only narrowed to warmth, breath, the rough, slow drag of her exhale against my mouth. Every inch of me was alert. My hands came up of their own accord and caught in the soft fabric at her waist. Leonie made a sound I felt more than heard, and then her mouth hovered just there. Not kissing me, not yet. So close I could feel the shape of her restraint. One more inch and 6 years would split open. I turned my head the slightest amount. My lips grazed the corner of hers. Leonie went rigid. Then, with visible effort, she drew back. The loss hit like cold water. I stared at her, stunned, humiliated, furious, aching. "I can't," she said, voice ragged. "Not like this." Like what? Half from fear, half from old hunger, with nowhere to go after except 3 feet apart till morning, pretending I still know how to think. I let go of her sweater. "So this is still about control." "This is about the fact that if I kiss you now," she said, and there was almost anger in the force of it, "I won't do it carefully." The sentence landed hot and devastating under my skin. I hated that it didn't soothe me. Maybe careful is overrated. Not with you. That should have been tenderness. Maybe it was. But all I could feel in that second was the old familiar edge of being managed. I pulled back, putting the width of the couch between us like a barrier I already knew wouldn't hold. "Right, of course. You'll forgive me if that starts sounding a lot like every other version of no." Leonie flinched as if I'd struck her. "That isn't fair." "No? Then what is it? Because from here, it looks a lot like you want the luxury of saying you wanted me without ever actually having to risk anything." Her expression changed. All softness gone. "That is not the luxury I've had. You always get to be the restrained one, the reasonable one. You leave me with all the embarrassment. I am on my knees in front of you, trying not to make a selfish choice. Maybe you don't get to decide that for both of us." The words came out sharper than I intended. Leonie went still in a way that signaled immediate regret in anyone with a self-preservation instinct. I did not have one where she was concerned. Finally, she stood. "Go to sleep. Do Imogen." The formality of it hit harder than anger would have. "Gladly," I said, which was a lie so obvious it should have collapsed the roof. She returned to the rug, turned her back. I lay down shaking and stared into the dark until the fire blurred, until my heartbeat slowed from thunder to something survivable, until the shape of her on the floor became both the nearest thing in the world and impossibly far away. At some point, exhaustion took me anyway. It came shallow and mean. I woke to a hand on my shoulder. Every muscle in my body clenched before I opened my eyes. The room was black except for a dying red seam in the fireplace. The lantern had gone out. Wind battered the cabin hard enough to make the walls murmur. For one disorienting instant, I didn't know where I was. Then Leonie's voice, close and low. "Hey, you were dreaming." I dragged in breath that felt wrong in my chest. Panic. Left over from sleep. "What time is it?" "No idea. Late." Her hand stayed where it was, warm even through the blanket. "You're all right." My heart hammered too fast. I pushed upright and the room swung. Leonie was a darker shape beside the couch, one knee against the floor, hair loosened completely now around her shoulders. "I'm sorry," I said, "because there are humiliations that settle into the bones, and that was one of mine, being woken from bad dreams like a child." "Don't." Her thumb moved once against the blanket over my arm. "You don't apologize for your body." That almost made me cry. which felt unfair, considering the rest of the evening. I laughed shakily instead. That's very enlightened for 3 in the morning. It's 4:13. You know the exact time? My watch glows in the dark. Of course it did. Naturally. I became aware then of how cold I was. The fire had dropped low. The air in the room felt thin and raw against my face. Leonie noticed before I spoke. She always did. Come here, she said quietly. I looked at her, confused. The couch isn't warm enough with the fire down. If you're shaking, come closer to the hearth. For a second, all I could think was that this was cruelty by accident, asking me to move toward the woman I had nearly kissed, who had refused me, who was now crouched in the dark with concern all over the set of her mouth. I'm fine, I lied. Leonie's silence made it clear what she thought of that. Then another gust hit, and the front windows rattled hard, and my body made the decision pride couldn't. I swore under my breath, dragged the blanket around my shoulders, and eased off the couch with my sore ankle protesting. Leonie spread the quilt beside hers without a word. We lay down parallel to the fire, not touching, 2 women positioned close only because warmth required it. The dark sharpened everything. Her breathing. Mine. The inches between us. Still angry? I whispered. Yes, she said after a moment. I stared at the faint red line of the fire. At me? At the timing. At myself. A pause. A little at you. Fair. Another beat of silence. Then softer. Are you? Yes. Fair. The answer was so dry it pulled another broken laugh from me. Maybe because of that. Maybe because the night had already skinned us past politeness, my hand moved before I could rethink it. It found the blanket between us, and then, after one suspended second, Leonie's fingers. She could have pulled away. She didn't. Our hands stayed there, barely linked in the dark, while the storm tried to pry the cabin apart, board by board. It was not a kiss. It was not forgiveness. It was worse. It was hope. I woke with my cheek against Leonie's shoulder and one of her arms curved around my waist. For a few perfect, appalling seconds, I didn't move. Morning had come pale and blurred through the windows, turning the room silver blue. The storm had eased from outright violence to a dense, relentless fall. The fire had burned down to ash and one small surviving flame. Under the blankets, heat pooled where our bodies met. My hand was tucked against the center of her chest, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall of her breathing through her shirt. I had no idea who had moved first in the night. I only knew that some exhausted animal part of both of us had chosen warmth, and the rest of us were now going to have to live with that information. Leonie stirred. Every muscle in my body went alert. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpened when she registered exactly where I was. The arm around my waist tightened reflexively for one awful, intoxicating beat. Then she went still. Neither of us spoke. I became exquisitely aware of everything at once. The rough softness of the blanket under my fingertips, her hand spread against my side, the faint smell of smoke in her hair, like the embarrassing fact that my entire body had chosen this position as if it had been waiting years to find it. Good morning, I said finally, because I am apparently committed to making impossible moments worse through civility. Leonie's mouth did something complicated. Morning. We remained exactly as we were for another second that felt like a dare. Then she eased her arm away carefully. Not abrupt, not rejecting, just deliberate enough to remind me that every inch mattered. I sat up first, blanket clutched around me. My hair was a nest. My ankle had improved but still throbbed when I shifted. Leonie pushed upright beside me, her own hair mussed in a way I had never seen and instantly wanted to memorize forever. She looked less composed in the morning light. Younger, softer, somehow more dangerous for it. Outside, like the windows were white, almost to the top. Snow packed against the porch railings in smooth sculpted drifts. One of the pines uphill had lost a heavy limb that now lay across the side yard. No chance of leaving yet. We're very snowed in, I said. Yes. Excellent. Leonie looked at me sidelong. You don't sound pleased. I'm never pleased before tea. That's a lie. I've seen you pleased by pastries. I contain multitudes. You contain sugar dependency. The answer came too easily, and because of that, it hurt a little. Ease with her was dangerous. It made me forget how quickly she could step back behind carefulness and leave me braced against thin air. Still, we made breakfast together. Oats, honey, the last decent apple in the fruit bowl cut into thin slices and cooked soft with cinnamon from the pantry tin. Leonie relit the fire while I handled the stove. We moved around each other with the strange, fragile gentleness of people who had already broken something and weren't sure whether touching the edges would make it worse or reveal it had been open all along. When I reached for a mug on the high shelf, my ankle protested and I sucked in breath. Leonie was beside me immediately. Sit. It's fine. Sit. You say that like you outrank me. In weather events, I do. I opened my mouth to object, then caught the look in her eyes and sat. There was no point fighting a woman who had spent half the night holding my panic together, and the other half apparently keeping me from freezing by folding me into her arms. She brought me tea first, then breakfast, then the ice pack from the first aid tin wrapped in a clean towel. This is wildly attractive behavior, I informed her. Leonie set the towel over my ankle and gave me a look over the rim of her own mug. You are impossible before noon. That's just because you're seeing me from flattering angles. It is 7:30. Then I'm impossible at dawn. There's range. Her mouth twitched. She sat opposite me by the fire, one leg bent, the other stretched toward the hearth. Morning light caught at the silver ring on her thumb and the tiny scar at her chin. The intimacy of the room had changed overnight. Not easier. If anything, sharper. Every small act now felt chosen with awareness. I wondered if she regretted the hand in the dark, the arm around my waist, the admission that had torn through me before midnight. I was still wondering when her phone, forgotten on the side table, lit briefly and buzzed against the wood. Signal. Weak, but enough. Leonie reached for it. I looked away automatically and then, stupidly, not quickly enough. The screen flashed a name before she turned it over. Odette. It was ridiculous how fast jealousy can humiliate you. A single name, and suddenly I was 20 again, standing in my sister's kitchen, while Leonie arrived at a winter party with an elegant, red-lipped woman in a velvet coat, the pair of them laughing over some private joke. I had spent that entire evening putting ice in glasses like I'd been born to domestic servitude, then gone home and kissed the wrong person because I was furious at myself for caring. Leonie glanced at me. There may be enough signal to send Blythe a message. Great, I said, because apparently I enjoy sounding exactly as normal as an unstable bridge. She kept looking. Imogen. What? Don't do that with your face. I stared down into my tea. I have no idea what that means. Yes, you do. I set the mug down before I dropped it. Fine. Is your girlfriend worried about you? The room changed. Leonie's brows drew together. My what? Odette. I hated how defensive my voice sounded. You can answer the text. I'm not asking you to take a vow of mountain chastity. For a second, she simply looked at me. Then she laughed once, incredulous. Odette is not my girlfriend. It should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me feel childish. She looked like your girlfriend, I muttered. When? At Blythe's engagement dinner. She had the velvet coat and the predatory cheekbones. Those are not reliable indicators. They're excellent indicators. Leonie set her mug aside. She's my architect. I blinked. Your architect. She's helping me with the office renovation. Oh. Also, she is 73. My mouth fell open. Leonie held my gaze for one beat, and then, mercifully, a laugh escaped her, for real this time. Quiet, rich, impossible not to answer with one of my own, even while heat flooded my face. That is a terrible thing to do to a person, I said. You accused me of mountain chastity. You liked that phrase. I hated it. Liar. The laughter faded, leaving something gentler in its wake. Leonie watched me with a softness I didn't trust because I wanted it too much. And for the record, she said, if I had a girlfriend, I would have mentioned her sometime in the last 12 years. You are very private. I'm not clandestine. I should have left it there. Instead, a different hurt, older and less funny, rose to meet it. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference with you. Leonie's expression quieted. Is that what you think I've been? Clandestine? No, I said. I think you've been careful, which is almost worse. She held my gaze. Imogen. I looked at the fire. There was another woman, though. Leonie frowned. No. Not a girlfriend. At least not officially. The summer after I graduated, Blythe said you'd been seeing someone from the legal clinic. A woman named Seren. Understanding moved over Leonie's face with painful slowness. Serena and I went on 2 dates. And then she told me very kindly that I had the emotional availability of a locked museum. I couldn't help it. A laugh slipped out. That does sound like you. Yes, it was humiliating. Thank you. Sorry. No, you're not. I smiled despite myself. It faded quickly. I remember hearing that and thinking, of course. Of course there are women you choose. Women who aren't... I stopped. Aren't what? Leonie asked quietly. I shrugged too hard. Complicated. Something in her face shifted. You really think the obstacle has ever been that I didn't choose you? I looked at her then, because there was no safety in not looking anymore. I think the obstacle has always been that you did and hated yourself for it. The air went taut. Leonie set her mug down with great precision. That isn't fair either. I know. Then stop turning me into the coldest version of myself because it hurts less than believing I cared. The words struck with frightening accuracy. I opened my mouth and found nothing ready enough to matter. She stood and crossed to the window, hands in the back pockets of her jeans, shoulders rigid under the dark thermal. Outside, snow fell without variation, relentless as thought. My caring has never been the problem, she said at last, voice quiet. Your timing, my timing, Blythe, your mother's illness, your age, my fear of becoming another person in your life who took when you were too raw to refuse. Those have all been problems. My caring has been catastrophically constant. My throat tightened around breath. She turned back before I could answer. I need to clear the back steps. Yeah, if the vent drifts over, we lose airflow to the heater. That sounds suspiciously like an excuse to leave the room. It can be 2 things. I stood too fast. Then I'm coming. No. You don't get to order me around because you can use a shovel attractively. Her eyes narrowed. That sentence should embarrass you. It does. Move over. She looked at my ankle, at my face, at whatever stubbornness I had inherited from the less useful corners of my family. Boots, coat, scarf, she said finally. And if you slip again, I am putting you on the counter and wrapping you in blankets until spring. Violent imagery, I said, relieved enough to make a joke of it. Her mouth flattened. I am not joking. I knew that. The cold outside hit like a slap after the relative warmth of the cabin. Snow reached mid-calf by the back porch. Leonie worked the shovel in efficient, heavy arcs, clearing the vent and the step path, while I brushed buildup from the railing and door frame with a broom. The air smelled like ice and pine sap and metal. Breath burned in my lungs. My scarf dampened with it quickly. It might have been peaceful in another life, the kind of hard shared task that settles something between people. A rhythm, a truce. But Leonie kept glancing at me as if proximity to weather was now a personal insult, and I kept pretending not to notice because the noticing felt too warm. When we came back inside, I peeled off my gloves with clumsy cold fingers. One of the wool socks in my borrowed bundle had slipped under the boot and rubbed my heel raw. I hissed when I took the shoe off. Leonie heard. Of course. What now? Nothing. That is never true with you. It's a blister. She crouched before I could protest and lifted my foot onto a chair. Her hands were cold from outside, steady as she tugged the sock down and examined the reddened skin. You collect minor injuries like they're loyalty points. I enjoy giving you hobbies. Her thumb skimmed the back of my ankle, nowhere near the blister, and my breath caught anyway. Leonie looked up, not at my foot. At me. That was the moment the room tipped again. There is a quality some silences take on when they stop being empty and start being full. This was that kind, the kind that alters the air pressure. She kept her hand at my ankle. I kept my hand locked white around the back of the chair. Leonie, I said, and meant, why are you looking at me like that in daylight when it would ruin me faster? She rose slowly, close enough now that I had to tilt my head back to keep her in view. Her palm came to the side of my neck. Not possessive, not hesitant either. Her thumb rested just below my ear, warm against the pulse fluttering there. You asked me last night whether I ever stopped wanting you, she said. My lips parted. Yes, I answered. I know. Then stop asking for proof in forms that punish both of us. The tenderness in it nearly undid me. So did the frustration. I'm not asking for punishment. No, she said, thumb moving once against my skin. You're asking me to be braver in exactly the place I've trained myself not to be. The truth of that made my chest ache. Before I could answer, a cracking sound split the air outside. Sharp, violent, much too close. We both turned. A second later, something slammed against the side of the cabin with enough force to shake dust from the ceiling beams. The entire house lurched. For one astonished heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then Leonie was already at the window, lifting the curtain and angling her body between me and the glass. A limb, she said, caught on the gutter. As if summoned by the words, the branch scraped downward with a hideous metallic scream. We need to see if it's going to take the eve with it, Leonie said, reaching for her coat. You are not going out there. She looked at me. I need 2 minutes. In a blizzard? In weather. That is not reassuring. Another wrenching scrape outside. Leonie caught my shoulders. Listen to me. I'll check it and come straight back. You stay inside. No. Imogen. Then, more quietly, please. That stopped me. Leonie did not spend please on simple things. I nodded once, hating it. She went out the back door with the flashlight. I made it maybe 15 seconds before panic shredded my promise. Through the side window, I could barely see her dark shape against the storm, one gloved hand on the wall, the branch hooked above her like a black question. Then her footing slipped on the ice. My body moved before thought did. I slammed into the cold after her. Leonie, she wheeled around, fury and fear colliding in her face. What did I say? That you were doing something stupid alone. The branch split free. It happened all at once. A crack like gunfire, a rush of snow, Leonie lunging. Her arm locked around my waist, and she drove me backward into the siding, just as the limb crashed down where I'd been standing. Bark and ice exploded over the path. For a second, she was over me, shielding me, breath ragged against my temple. Then she hauled me inside by the hand and kicked the door shut so hard the frame rattled. What were you thinking? She demanded. That you were out there. That is not an answer. It's the only one I have. She stared at me, chest rising too fast, hair wet with melting snow. You do not get to scare me like that. Why? I shot back, still shaking. Because Blythe asked you to keep an eye on me? Because you've appointed yourself guardian of every bad decision I make? The words landed, and I knew instantly they were cruel. Leonie recoiled as if I'd hit a bruise. No, she said. Then louder, rougher. Because I love you. Silence. Outside, the storm kept hurling itself at the mountain. Inside, the cabin held still around the sound of my pulse. Leonie scrubbed a hand over her mouth, gave up on restraint all at once. I loved you when it was a terrible idea. I loved you when you were grieving and I could barely stand in the same room without wanting to hold you. I loved you when staying away felt kinder than making you carry the weight of my wanting. I loved you last night, and I love you now. And if you keep asking me to pretend this is manageable, I can't. I think my whole life tilted on that can't. I stepped toward her slowly, because everything suddenly felt breakable in the best possible way. Then don't pretend. Her eyes searched mine, fierce and wrecked. If I kiss you now, there is no version of this where I go back to being careful. I don't want careful. That undid her. I kissed her first, and Leonie met me like she had been starving with exquisite manners for years and had finally decided hunger was not the same thing as harm. One hand came to my jaw, the other to the back of my neck. The kiss was warm, then deeper, then devastating, full of held breath and old restraint, and the exact kind of tenderness that makes your knees weak because it knows how easily it could become too much and chooses not to. When she drew back, her forehead stayed against mine. You're shaking, she whispered. So are you. That's inconvenient for my reputation. I laughed, which turned into something dangerously close to crying. Leonie kissed the corner of my eye before the tear could fall. Tell me again, I said. Her mouth softened. I love you, Imogen. The rest of the day became strangely gentle. We sent Blythe a message when signal flickered in, long enough. Alive, trapped, till the road clears. Blythe answered with a scandalized amount of delight and a final text that read about time, which made Leonie mutter darkly about older sisters, while I laughed into her shoulder. We cooked pasta with canned tomatoes. Leonie kissed me in the kitchen while the sauce simmered, one hand at my waist and the other braced on the counter, and stopped only long enough to murmur, "See, I can learn moderation," against my mouth. Dubious, I told her. Rude. Later, wrapped together under blankets by the fire, I asked the question I had wanted to ask for years. When you looked at me on the dock that summer, I said quietly, tracing the seam of her sleeve with one finger, were you trying not to kiss me? Leonie didn't even pretend not to understand. Yes. Good, I said, absurdly relieved all over again. She brushed my hair back from my face. Why is that good? Because I have wasted a humiliating amount of time on that memory. Her smile, real, open, still rare enough to feel stolen, hit me harder than the confession had. You didn't waste it. That night, we took the bedroom because the couch was criminal and because nobody was pretending distance was noble anymore. The bed was narrow. We fit anyway. I fell asleep, with Leonie's hand spread warm over my ribs, and woke once in the dark to her kissing my forehead like she meant to keep doing it for years. Morning came clear and bright. The storm had exhausted itself, while leaving the world glittering and stunned. When the road crew finally opened the lower track, I stood on the porch with Leonie in the hard blue sunlight and felt oddly unwilling to leave the place where everything had changed. She came up behind me, touched the small of my back. Ready? I turned, slid my hands into her coat, and looked at the woman I had spent so long not wanting badly enough to ache. Yes, I said, as long as this part comes with me. Leonie's expression softened into certainty. She kissed me there on the porch, slow enough to feel like an answer. We drove down the mountain hand in hand whenever the road allowed it, the valley opening below us in sheets of white and silver. Blythe's smug face, a life to rearrange. For once, none of that felt frightening. Home. I realized as Leonie's thumb moved over my knuckles on the center console, was not a building at all. It was the first place my heart was fully chosen. It was the warmth of her mouth still lingering on mine. It was the hand at my back when we walked into the rest of our lives. And for the first time, safety and desire felt like the same bright thing.